In a number of respects, the US now resembles an emerging country more than the advanced economy it was some decades ago. Its industrial base is largely gone, sold off, or offshored, and its public infrastructure is in visible disrepair. Because of the severity of the real estate collapse, parts of its housing stock are being abandoned, and once thriving neighbourhoods are now slums. But it is in politics, even more than in the economy, that the chaotic conditions of some emerging economies most clearly prevail. The bailout of the banks that began in the Bush era and that has continued and expanded under the Obama administration is a prime example of the crony capitalism against which the US ceaselessly railed in emerging markets.
We don't have a free market, don't kid yourself. The two biggest enemies of the free market are two separate groups, my academic colleagues and business people. Business people are enemies of free markets, not friends. The academic people are all in favor of freedom for themselves, except even now they aren't even in favor of that with this politically correct nonsense that's going around. But historically, academic people have always been in favor of freedom for themselves. They want to be able to say what they want, write what they want, do whatever research they want. But they're all against freedom for everybody else. They think that they know better what's good for the poor people than the poor people do. They think they can run the economy better than the businesses can. The business people are just the opposite. They're all in favor of freedom for everybody else. And at the drop of a hat, you can get any leading businessman to give you an eloquent speech on the virtues of free market. But when it comes to their own business, they want to go down to Washington and get a special tariff to protect their business. They want a special tax deduction. They want a tax subsidy. When Chrysler's on the verge of failing, which it should have done, it should have been allowed to fail, Chrysler goes down and exercises political influence to try to get the government to lend it money to subsidize. So businessmen in general, not all, there have been some notable exceptions, and I don't want to include everybody, just as not all intellectuals are in that class. But in the main, most businessmen are enemies of free markets. The real beneficiaries of free markets are the invisible man, the consumer, the ordinary worker. Those are the real people who benefit from free markets. But unfortunately, they don't have the kind of political clout that PAC, Political Action Committee from Big Business, has. One of the great economists of the 19th century was Alfred Marshall. And he has as a sort of motto for one of his books, the seen and the unseen. And it's a marvelous motto for this. What happens in economics over and over again is that there are two sets of effects of any action. The immediately visible effects and the widespread invisible effects. And the widespread invisible effects are often much more important than the visible ones. But people don't see them. Let me give you very simple examples. We have a quota on the amount of sugar that can be imported from various countries. The visible effect of that is that there are about a couple of 100,000 growers of beet sugar who benefit greatly from it, who are able to keep on growing beet sugar. They don't benefit so greatly because most of the money goes into paying the expenses of growing the beets. And indeed, if there were no such quota, they would find something else to do. But who believe, in the short run, appear, the visible effect is that they are able to have a market they would otherwise not have. The invisible effect is that every consumer in the United States pays twice as much for the sugar he or she buys as the world price. Now, you're a consumer. How much attention to the fact do you pay to the fact that you pay twice as much for sugar as you ought to? Is the fact that you pay twice as much for sugar as you ought to going to lead you to go down to Washington to testify against the sugar quota? But are the beet sugar farmers going to go down to Washington to testify in favor of the sugar quota? It's a typical example of the seen versus the unseen, the concentrated visible versus the dispersed invisible. And the major reason why roughly half the income of this country is controlled by governmental agencies instead of by the people who earn it.
What do you mean by crony capitalism?
Crony capitalism is about the aggressive and proactive use of political resources, lobbying, campaign contributions, influence peddling of one type or another to gain something from the governmental process that wouldn't otherwise be achievable in the market. And as the time has progressed over the last 2 or 3 decades, I think it's gotten much worse. Money dominates politics. And as a result, we have neither capitalism or democracy. We have crony capitalism, which is the worst. It's not a free market. There isn't risk-taking in the sense that if you succeed, you keep your rewards. If you fail, you accept the consequences. Look what the bailout was in 2008. There was clearly reckless speculative behavior going on for years on Wall Street. And then when the consequence finally came, the Treasury stepped in and the Fed stepped in. Everything was bailed out and the game was restarted. And I think that was a huge mistake.
You write, quote, during a few weeks in September and October 2008, American political democracy was fatally corrupted by a resounding display of expediency and raw power. Henceforth, the door would be wide open for the entire legion of Washington's K Street lobbies, reinforced by the campaign libations prodigiously dispensed by their affiliated political action committees, to relentlessly plunder the public purse. That's a pretty strong indictment.
Yeah, and but on the other hand, I think you would have to say it was fair. When you look at what came out of 2008, the only thing that came out of 2008 was a stabilization of these giant Wall Street banks. Nothing came out of 2008 that really helped Main Street. Nothing came out of 2008 that addressed our fundamental problems, that we've lost a huge swath of our middle-class jobs. Nothing came out of 2008 that made financial discipline or fiscal discipline possible. It was justified as sort of expediency. We need to do this. We need to stop the contagion. But it wasn't thought through.
One other thing that you want to change is you want to repeal Obamacare.
That's right.
I should point out that you are a survivor of breast cancer, and we're all very grateful for that. Didn't your experience show you that the pre-existing condition part of Obamacare is crucial, that there are so many people out there like you but without your means who wouldn't be alive if it were not for the part of the law that says insurance companies have to take on people with pre-existing conditions.
I absolutely endorse that goal. I did at the time, but guess what? None of that has worked. Demonstrably, if you look at the results of Obamacare, what you see is emergency room visits are up over 50%. Health insurance premiums are up almost 40% now. We're dumping more and more people into Medicaid. Medicaid is a program that fewer and fewer doctors will accept patients from. That isn't helping anyone with cancer, I can assure you. The problem is
The
this.
expansion of the pool allows the insurance companies to pay for the people with pre-existing.
What is happening to the health insurance market right now, as we speak, and it's what I predicted? Who helped write Obamacare? The health insurance companies and the drug companies. And guess what's happening? Those companies are consolidating. That's called crony capitalism. Let's have a big program, let's get bigger to deal with it, and meanwhile, people are getting left on the sidelines.
There's been a lot of talk this week about maternity leave because Netflix is now offering paid maternity leave, a full year for new mothers. You're opposed to any kind of mandated paid maternity leave. Why?
Well, when I was the chief executive of Hewlett-Packard, we also offered paid maternity leave and paternity leave. For the government to tell others how to do things when the government hasn't gotten its basic house in order is not only ineffective, it's hypocritical.
What do you mean basic house in order? The government shouldn't tell anybody that they have to offer paid maternity leave?
I don't think it's the role of government to dictate to the private sector how to manage their businesses, especially when it's pretty clear that the private sector, like Netflix, like the example that you just gave, is doing the right thing because they know it helps them attract the right talent. What I mean by the federal government not having its house in order, the federal government is in a shambles right now. It's inept. TSA fails 96% of the time. That's ineptitude.
I don't understand what that necessarily means about why you oppose paid maternity leave.
I'm not saying I oppose paid maternity leave. What I'm saying is I oppose the federal government mandating paid maternity leave to every company out there.